Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 8th in our speaker series, our Food for Thought speaker series. Today, we're honored to have Professor Adela Gondek. She's going to be discussing the ethics at the intersection of economic development, high finance, and the mortal pandemic. As usual, if you'd like to ask a question during the Q&A session, click on the bottom left under participants to raise your hand, and we'll call on you in the order that you raise your hand. Now I'm going to pass it off to Bill, and then we'll have Adela do a quick summary of her paper, and we'll open it up for questions. Bill?
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for all your hard work, and you and Georgia and Valerie and Maria Cecilia for keeping this thing rolling. We're going to go through the end of the year and maybe thereafter, but I don't think we're going to have a more intellectual paper than the one that Dr. Gondek, Adela, did for us. It is, if you haven't read it, I recommend it to you. It's fantastic. It is by far the best paper we've gotten so far, and I think it will be the best one at the end. For those of you who don't know Adela, she teaches ethics for multiple programs around the university, including, thank God, us, the EMPA program since the beginning. And it is always the most highly rated class. I've had the pleasure to sit in on her classes numerous times. She's just a great teacher, absolutely great. And I think what makes her so great is she has such a broad knowledge of science and politics and the environment and sustainability and ethics and people. She's just really terrific. And all this she's overcome because she got her PhD from Harvard, which is like, you know, starting a race with your legs tied together and one arm pinned behind your back. But she has overcome it. And she has become a great scholar, despite all the wrong things she probably learned at Harvard. Anyway, I've known her for a very long time, and she's one of the nicest people you could ever meet. And we're just honored to have her here. So Adela, it's your show. Take it over.
Thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to present this current research I've been doing. So I'll try to be brief, but it might take me a little while, but there should be at least, 30 minutes for discussion, hopefully. So in any case, hello to everyone who is here today. And you can see here that I have a slide up that is, directed at 3 different things. Well, actually 2 are the main concerns, and that is development, especially development that has a lot of financial transactions, and especially what we call high finance, that is like very expensive deals, and whether there is a correlation of the pandemic with development. So I started exploring this, as the pandemic was evolving. And I'll just begin like looking first at the idea, very general idea that, well, we do have some very global concerns. And 2 of them do happen to be globalized disease and globalized development. So I thought, well, that's a good starting point. I mean, they're both pretty global, and we have been given some warnings and so on about the possibilities of diseases becoming very global. And so you see here, I don't know if many of you know the story of Dr. Li Wen-Yang, an ophthalmologist in Wuhan. I won't go into all the details, but he, as an ophthalmologist, as you know, you have also the possibility of getting pathogens into your eyes. He did notice SARS-like illness among his patients, some of them, and it had been indicated by the government even before then that there might be some SARS-like factor. That message was sent by Beijing to the hospitals of Wuhan, and some doctors like he got very engaged with that because they had been seeing that phenomenon. And on December 30th, he put it on his WeChat app. And very soon the police came and they told him that he was a rumor monger, and that he was severely disturbing social order. Well, he obviously in that moment became what we call a whistleblower, and he was significantly silenced. They said, "You will stop this, won't you?" And he said he would, but he became ill and he was very sick in January and died on February 7th. Interestingly, to the credit of Beijing, the Supreme Court of China said in a case related to him and others, said it would have been fortunate if the public had listened to this person, Dr. Win Young. And it's very interesting that the case was written in a way that said that the public listened. It did not call the government on that, did not say, it would have been nice if the executive branch had done something about it. But in any case, at least the Supreme Court said that, and then Beijing itself proclaimed later this group of doctors as martyrs, which is a very high honor in the People's Republic of China. But in any case, you see there we have this sense of, of a problem, but there is also a sense that we need to cover this up. So that's a problem right away. And then on the right side, I gave you another little picture, which is very interesting, and it does have to do with development. Modern development requires a tremendous amount of partnering, teamships, often which is bilateral and multilateral. And you can see there when you have two or more parties, you do have a strong potential of having a conflict of interest. Now, you can have that, and so the whole time you have to see these little figures in that picture are like trying to balance. So there's a desire to balance because there's a partnership, but there's also a desire to leverage. In other words, you'd really like to get more for your side. So balancing and leveraging at the same time can really cause chaos also for, these kinds of decisions and so on. And so we have that too. These are areas of concern. What do you do about the possibility of global illness? What do you do about the sort of fraught nature of partnership in globalized development? By the way, when you notice that you have that kind of conflict, it's called a conflict of interest, but please notice that in itself is not wrongdoing. And this is just something too that we need to remember, like when the case of Hunter Biden came up, the newspapers kept saying he didn't do anything wrong. But that's not the right thing to say. The thing to say is, did he have a conflict of interest, and therefore should he have recused himself like a judge? Like a judge would not say, I have a conflict of interest in this case, but I'm still going to decide it. No, it's up to them to say, I recuse myself from it, just like when you go to jury duty and so on. So these are very sort of, subtle and ethical questions that we can see, even taking this very quick look at the situation out there. Okay, so then I was led to this inquiry. Is there a high-risk relationship between pandemic onset and development practice? Can we conjoin those two things, the possibility of globalized disease and the facts of globalized development? And we can see right away when we look at development or any kinds of sort of economic transactions that there is the problem of what we call risky deals. And here we have Jesse Jackson in 2007 at the head of the protests that arose in relation to all the mortgage defaults and problems. And it's really one of the key ways in which deals can be risky is that they can be predatory. In other words, you may be offered, here's some money for this and so on, but already you're going to get a lot more out of this deal than the recipient of the money that you get. So fairness in lending arises. That's predatory lending. And at the same time, another problem with transactions that involve finance is the possibility of corruption, especially bribery and embezzlement. So predatory lending is a case of giving money gone wrong, and bribery and embezzlement of taking money. And there are two other main kinds of risky deals, and one of them is non-assessment of value, and that's what environmentalists always say. You, in making that deal, fail to include the value of human health and natural health, environmental health. You didn't calculate that into the deal. So it's very exclusionary from the start. And then the fourth kind is laundered deals, where you have actually money being transferred surreptitiously from the illegal economy of the world. That's slavery, prostitution, drugs, etc., being laundered in name into the, looks like it belongs to the legal economy. Even if the legal economy is tough, it still would be better than the illegal economy. Any case, so then I was thinking, okay, so development, as far as it involves money, is already laced with risk. And then I thought, well, what about indicators with the relationship to pandemic? Do we have any historic indicators or contemporary ones? And here you have, yes, I know, Columbus, who happens to be much in dispute nowadays. It's interesting, though, to review that particular case. He's an explorer, and he was actually funded by the King and Queen of Spain, of Castile. He was not funded in any way by Britain, which wasn't ready to fund too much at that time yet. But Spain was quite, had enough funding. And also all of his sailors were excellent and brilliant, Spanish sailors who really knew, but they didn't know where they were going. What they were seeking was not land, but they were seeking a way to get to China. And that was what they were concerned with, but they bumped into this land, and you can see that they did not go to North America per se, they were more in the Caribbean. But in any case, they did create an onslaught of disease conveyance. It only takes so many people to mingle with others who are already there to transmit typhus, cholera, many diseases, influenza, pneumonia, and so on, that these people to some extent had antibodies, but the ones that were already there did not have any antibodies. So even though they weren't in North America, it was a likelihood, that they would be transmitted that way very quickly because of the massive epidemics that would be caused. Now, look, if you look there on the right side, even older than that is the old Silk Road. And notice again, this is an effort to open markets. Notice that we don't yet have this idea that where you go, you're all going to start a plantation of some kind. The idea is to get to a market with the stuff that is generated in where you're coming from and so on. Now, obviously, there's the hope that there'll be some, take back from that eventually. But initially, it's a search for market. And so the old Silk Road, really, Beijing or Peking, whatever it was called at that time, was especially seeking to reach Rome. And Rome was very much in love with the silks that China was, renowned for making. And especially because in Phoenicia, silk would be dyed purple, and purple was such a highly valued color that only the Roman emperor could wear it, and each senator could have one band of it on the white toga. But, cared a lot about textiles as conspicuously showing who you are and so on. But also on the old Silk Road came infectious diseases like bubonic plague. And so every time we have this transition, and it has to do directly with development, it has to do with the people that are, manning those camel caravans or those ships or whatever. So we're already familiar with that in human history. And so again, I pressed on with my research. So what about the development projects today? And I realized that there are two that are tremendous in the world right now. They are the biggest development projects. And I'm sure you all know the one that is the SDGs. That one is launched by the United Nations, signed by all 193 signatories on September 15th in 2015. And its expected cost is approximately $12 trillion, but that keeps getting larger, and its due date or completion supposed date is 2030. But you can see there, the number one is no poverty. And number 17 has to do with partnerships for the goals, including number one. So this one you can see is very like what you would call socially conscious, okay? This is not strictly an economic kind of dealing. It's also, you know, with the value of life. And there's also a tremendous emphasis on it, on a healthy environment for all people. All right, the second one that we have here is China's Belt and Road Initiative. And actually, before I started doing this research, I was not as familiar with this as I am now, but I was much more familiar with the SDGs. This is called the BRI, and it was also called the One Belt, One Road Initiative. So then it was the OBOR, and then some people that have gotten angry lately have said, you know, the One Belt, One Road, One Virus. And I said, like, okay, give it a rest, you know. But in any case, you hear everything. But this was a tremendous initiative. President Xi sort of thought that it was his initiative. He launched it in 2013 when the MDGs were still in place, and it keeps getting added on to. No one knows that I can find anywhere on site what is the projected cost of this. The estimates are from $1 to $8 trillion. And this is why I posted together with this one, because it is involving a tremendous amount. Now, you see the blue lines, those are the marine corridors. So China, again, can ship for markets everywhere. And the people along there can do so too. Okay, and likewise, you can see the land, the routes, those are land transportation routes and so on, but it has to do with really, they call them economic corridors. In other words, the emphasis that the SDGs put on poverty and the environment is like not number one in this. It is pretty much, but it isn't just for China, it's for anyone that wants to partner with it, largely for economic uplift purposes, okay? So this is to be kept in mind, but as you can see, you know, it's a very complex situation. The Europeans hesitated to get on board because they saw it as somewhat threatening to their own area of influence, and the U.S. also, the U.S. also has not found it to its advantage, you know, and has not participated in that. Nor has South America too much, although South America, some of it is beginning to join in, but is now increasingly hesitant. All right, so we see those two big projects, and then on the pandemic side, obviously our disease that we're looking at is the COVID-19. That's what we're looking at today. That's on our table. It is very interesting, though. I mean, we do know the deadliness of you know, the spread of disease, the bubonic plague in the more Middle Ages and so on, did vast devastations to people. As a matter of fact, some people have said that that was one of the reasons why the Vikings from Norway pulled out of Newfoundland, where way before Columbus, they got to the Newfoundland area. And they tried, but it was, you know, it wasn't easy to live there. They weren't really great farmers there or anything like that among them. They were just strong sailors, I guess. I don't know, but so they finally pulled out. But when they got back, scientists think they came back to empty villages because in their absence, the bubonic plague had destroyed so much of the European population. And then they say, well, what the heck? Why should we go back? I mean, we better just stay here. We're the only ones left or something like that. So you can see that there's a lot of mix in this already about development and disease, because these things, how much you want to put in this bucket depends on what's in the other bucket, etc., what you have to deal with. But in any case, I wanted you to see here in terms of ethics that already we see a distinction between two kinds of questions. One, technical questions of knowledge and skill. So the mask is one of them. We've had endless renditions on what a mask should be made of. People have actually gotten angry in this society to look at people who put the mask beneath their nose, only over their mouth. Other people pull it up over their nose and let their mouth talk, and then someone else criticizes them, and then they get an infuriated response to mind their own business. And so it's very complex. And and when you add into things like the Center for Disease Control actually has to calculate what do you do to be fair to people who read lips, like they may not hear well or at the same level as other people, and they can't see the lips moving. You know, so all kinds of different things have to be covered on this, but it's a matter of knowledge. You know, what do the scientists say? What do the physicians say? And the social workers. All right, so then we come to the other type of question, which is not a technical question, but an ethical question. Because at a certain point, human beings engage in this kind of behavior, which is, I'm fed up with this, and I want to blame someone from it. And you might feel that from day one. Other people sort of just start getting angrier and angrier and so on, or more frustrated, etc. This is a picture of doctors from Spain and Italy, and you can see the interesting phenomenon that they are suffering from what is called burnout. Obviously in these kind of circumstances, people do despair. You know, they're unable to work. There's among people who are not in this first line responder group, you know, feel bored at home, feel like they want to get back to work, etc. So we kind of go from a busy world to a kind of lockdown world, but for them it's anything but lockdown. It's like busier than ever. So we have a lot of discrepancies with regard to feelings and so on, and many of them do suffer, and people do start complaining and assigning blame. You know, so we'll get back to that momentarily. I just wanted to put it out. So back to Milan, Italy, and Qom, Iran. My initial question: why there? Why were those the two main epicenters? And I've traveled a bit. I've been to Italy. I've been to quite a bit of the Middle East, and you know, I thought, boy, there's nothing really too much the same about these, and they're not right across the border from each other. So why are these two the epicenters, the first two epicenters outside China? Now, Italy was the first, at the same time, developed country to sign on to China's BRI at a cost of about 2.8 million, I believe. And Qom, Iran, also was involved early and so on with China, and I'll go into the further details just in a moment. But I look at this, when you see it, this is a picture on one side from Italy and on the other from Iran. And again, you see that blame mechanism. And we think it's just us who need someone to blame, but in every country. And what I do is I look, but I have to look in translation in many places, at other countries' newspapers, like the South China Morning Post and the Manila Banner and so on, because I want to read what they hear on their streets. And not what we don't, like our reporters might not talk to their reporters. You know, I mean, that's a lot of journalists in the world. But here are quotations. You see, in Italy, people are saying, we don't want revenge, we want justice. Now, we've heard that a lot, and no one has apologized. And there you see on the other side in Iran, critics say the Iranians didn't ask, the government didn't act soon enough and was in denial and so on. So you see that sort of, you know, feeling of injustice in the streets and so forth right away. They had that in common. And I could see that the atmosphere there was in common on that point. But also, I then realized that both those areas are right on the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, that's another map similar to the one I first showed you, showing, you know, different names in there. But I circled for you Tehran, which is right near Qom and is the capital of Iran, and then Venice, which is right near, you know, in northern, more or less in northern Italy itself. But it's on the marine corridor, economic corridor, and Tehran is on the land corridor. You see that. So you can see that they're right there in association, apparently easily in the case of Tehran. You know, is closer to China than Italy, but I noticed that they were right there on the path of the BRI. And I thought, okay, so what happened there? And that's where I decided to research just what went on. Looking at money, looking tells you a lot. And so you have to look for those deals and those things online, but I didn't need any whistleblowers or anything. I eventually could find these amounts, etc. And you see there, it was in 2019 that China invested 2.8 billion in Italy, first developed country to join, as I said, and September 2019, that China invested 400 billion in Iran. Unprecedented size of deal. There has not been another such large development deal in terms of money. Notice here in that little South China Morning Post that the South China Morning Post had looked into the earlier situation, and as of their research all the way to November 17th, 2019, they said that the government itself was recording diseases caused by a novel coronavirus. It didn't have the name yet, COVID-19, but it was called a novel coronavirus. And obviously that's a terrifying thing because it's very similar to the SARS illness, etc. And you see here that the South China Morning Post had interviews with whistleblowers, and say that they were only talking about it in late December, but their data from insiders inside the government told them, no, it's recorded as being earlier. But, and you can see there in the top print there that even so, having those deals in place, China did not cancel a BRI summit in Trieste, right across from Venice, and in November after those cases, nor a meeting of the foreign minister of Iran on December 31st. And that, not a word. And it's not even clear whether the WHO got a word. However, there were other things they did report, like someone happened to walk into, in November, Wuhan with pneumonic bubonic plague. And that did go published on what's called the Daily Digest of Diseases. Okay, so in other words, there was some discernment about what we're going to talk about putatively. This is obviously a problem. It isn't just a conflict of interest. Now, here is just a follow-up on what I just said. That is from the program, which is right online. Successful businesses in the way ahead. High-level conferences, roundtables, November 20th and 21st in Trieste. And that's northern Italy, you see. And what was even more interesting was that had been planned way ahead. We know to have war games, you have to plan ahead. You got to get all those ships there. China, Russia, and Iran. War games in the Gulf of Oman, December 27th and 30th, 2019. And then the minister of foreign affairs from Iran with his entourage of high-level people went to Beijing for a personal meeting with this Chinese foreign minister. Now, obviously, they didn't know. And I suggest if you see this, you look, you see I have two YouTube little things. You can actually see them close to each other, leaning over their papers and so on. Talk about social distancing on December 31st, etc. The sailors, you see, are intermingling with each other from different countries in late December. And they're just like the sailors on the, Santa Maria, etc. They're going to carry things home that they come in contact with. And one of the interesting things about the disease in Iran is that it has destroyed so many and sickened and quite a few died of the high level. It's usually the poorer people who get these things. And obviously, if you're taking your high-level people everywhere, you're putting them at risk, but then they're going to go home, to the maid and the butler or whoever else is there. And there's going to be also a transaction, of disease with, people of low income. But in any case, this astonished me when I looked at it. I said, like, why wouldn't they have canceled it? or at least told the who, if you have it in your records. Okay, but this is what I just, I know I have to speak quickly. To me, the best hypothesis is it's money. And we all know the sayings, money talks, but it also silences. And when you have these kind of deals, people are apt, this is how business as usual works. Transparency is not, easy to elicit from any corporations, any of them in the planet. And because, money talks and money silences. And sometimes that one is called lush money when it's, conspicuous consumption. The other one is called hush money. And we all know this, but to think that the price of that can be as many people who have died in the world. I mean, usually we just say, okay, that's the way business works. But when the coattails of business are a pandemic, that's a problem. That's even another problem. And by the way, you can see here in the Milano that Milan was selling Gucci and Prada to China. And China sent its own workers into the factories. And so then they make the product and then take it back to China, and the label says made in Italy. I mean, this is amazing to track this. It's just astonishing. It's hard to teach ethics because everything starts falling into the same bucket. You don't know what to say. And then here you see in the shrine, in Com, the clerics were infuriating, saying that they would not ever shut down the important shrine there, and so on. This is in Com, Fatima Masuma shrine. And yet the government was saying we need to close it. And you can see it's a whole different cultural thing. And then they kept saying, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. The diseases, and that is obviously a problem. That's what's called soft pedaling. It's between money talks and money science. Soft pedaling refers to the soft pedal on a piano. It tunes things down so you don't have to listen to the truth. In any case, I just have here toward closing, values obviously matter. And the interesting thing I think that has not been sufficiently emphasized is that people have always had values, and some business persons do things in a respectful and honest and diligent way. But then with corporate social responsibility arose the idea that you need a written value statement, like a written constitution. So you write that, look on any website and you will see NGOs, etc., have written value statements called value statements. And they talk about their integrity, respect, honesty, trust, and so on. And because it's written down, it becomes a problem, because it's not like you're just saying, well, my culture is more important than the doctrine of human rights. That's something that came out of France during the Enlightenment. You can't just say that anymore. You have to say, yes, I did sign on the dotted line to those values, regardless of any cultural proclivities, tendencies, or whatever. And I violated my own promise. And that's obviously that's just hypocrisy. And often it is accompanied by what we call deceptive non-disclosure. That's an easy way of saying, well, I'm just not going to talk about this because, it really looks like I lied when I signed my name. And I have here, also the World Health Organization has been imputed as being unfair because soft pedaling, as well as European nations that signed on to partnerships with China have been soft pedaling. And that you can see in our own newspapers and so on, because no one wants the other party to disinvest. When you sign a deal, you don't want one of the parties to say, oh, I'm tired of this, I'm taking back my, football and getting out of here. Then the rest of them who have invested money is a problem. And this is not even to mention these other creatures, the pangolin and the bat, but they are big, like, hey, if we put that out there, let's focus on those creatures, because anyway, we don't have to focus on other things. But I focus on the other things because that's what I teach. I'm not an ecologist. Okay, so I just put forth here this idea that we need to think in terms of redevelopment, and everyone developing, and everything in between needs to be changed instead of just BAU, business as usual, which involves a lot of strategic cover-up in many cases. You can see here, I turned my attention, well, what about the third epicenter, New York, New Jersey? We're not involved with the BRI, okay? And then I thought to myself, well, you know, what about another industry? And I thought, oh, healthcare. You know, I know that a lot of drugs are produced by the great pharmaceutical companies in China and ever growing and so on. And I know a lot are produced in our country. And so I, you know, looked, and sure enough, November 18 to 20 in Shanghai, another, you know, another major summit, and Amgen and Beijing, Gene, made big deals. So obviously you wouldn't want to cancel that. Oh dear, I'm sorry, just when I was drawing to a close. And so my last little thing to suggest to you is like recovery. And this is what Jeremy asked me in the beginning. Obviously, we need to think about corporate social accountability, and we need to think about global social distancing and contact tracing. So give us the list of people who have attended these high summit meetings from 100 different countries, going back to their crowded, beautiful, you know, office suites, etc., in elevators filled with workers and so forth. We need to do better with just tracking everything. And in each one of these cases, I added the word proactively. And by the way, I have number 5, the earthly level, just to say, which I haven't dwelled upon a lot. It's very interesting because I looked at the programs of all the summits. NGOs are not invited, because they're watchdogs and protesters and complainers and critics. And this particular, I said, well, I'll see what the Sierra Club says about all this, just to see how, you know, gauge my own reactions to it, because I'm always trying to, you know, look at all sides, look at all. The first article I saw was, why does China want to pave the planet? Okay, so the Sierra Club is not going to be invited to those kind of summit meetings. And that in itself, if you don't invite the protesters, if you don't invite the critics, you know, you have a problem with those summits, and the people need to know what's going on and who's going where and why. And the largest kind of question is this, anyone that can ask, I'm sorry I've gone on so long, is really, should we as people, individuals, consumers, travelers, etc., partners, shareholders, whatever, disinvest? Now, we've heard of divest a lot, but to disinvest means, you know, you would not buy the products of companies that that are involved in what we can call, you know, development malpractice. Or if we will not change our habits, does it mean our ethics just unaffordable? People are not going to care that much when they've vested, you know, when they have certain habits, they want Gucci, they want Prada, whatever it is they want. It just says, well, I'm not going to disinvest, but I'm going to complain. All right, so that's all I have to say. I'm so sorry. At least we have, I think, 20 minutes. So any questions, okay?
Thank you so much.
This was all new to me too. It's just been research of the past 4 or 5 months, and I normally don't dig that much into business, but I had to, and I thought like, oh wow, now I know why I don't dig that much into business.
All righty. Bill?
So I think I'm unmuted. Thank you, Adela.
Yes.
That was
Oh.
incredible. So if there was greater transparency, could one say, this is the price that we pay for globalization, and short of maybe having wellness tests at the airport, maybe we need to live with this?
Bill, I think you're absolutely right. You know, and when I present these problems, it's not because at all that I'm in any way against globalization. I think we need to move ahead with things like the SDGs and so on. This is very, very important. These values and so on that are embodied in all those little colorful cubes that we see. But I do think we need to be aware that this is a constant problem. And obviously, anyone who is going global, whether they're on the cruises, the vacation ships, or whether they're labor forces that are being transitioned around, like we had to Iran and to Italy, labor infused into those from China, that we need to be able to keep better track of that. And I think that you're right, if it needs to be, testing as a part of our normal management routine. I don't see why, if there are rules about you can't bring a plant in,
Right.
and you have to report that at customs. Like I picked up a flower and I wanted to bring it home to dry in a special book, and they say, throw it away, lady. If
Right.
we're so worried about these kinds of fungi and other microbes contaminating our ecosystems of plants and animals, you cannot, it's illegal to bring animals from other places and plants, then why do we get an exemption? When we know from the ships of Columbus and the old Silk Road in the East that we're vectors of disease. So, I think definitely we need to really to include us. I mean, it's very anthropocentric to say we get an exemption, from being tested, I think.
I agree.
It just is going to take much more proactive management.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is a thing. We always think of management as kind of routine and as kind of, just dealing with the issues of the moment. But I think, just like in the healthcare industry for a long time, it was like, if you get sick, you go to the doctor. And then HMOs and the idea of proactive healthcare was invented and had to be promoted. And now all parents want their children to have well baby checkups and so on. So I think we just need to spread that to governance. It needs to be proactive on behalf of human health.
I agree.
Are there any other questions?
We have a question from Talani.
Oh, Talani, hi.
I think she wants, I'll read it out for her. In the recovery slide, you mentioned global contact tracing. How do we account for privacy measures in contact tracing? We've seen a mini case study forming in the management failures of New York City contact tracing in both the people being traced and the workers. What can be imagined? Great presentation, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Talani. I think that's an excellent question. And again, I think it's one of those trade-offs. I know that in our course, she was in my public ethics course, we talked about transparency as as having its own limitations, in the sense that we also need to respect confidentiality. So that we always have, a confrontation. Nothing is easy in management. There are conflicting values, just like there are conflicting behaviors. But I think, we probably have to, take into consideration, at least we have a blueprint there with regard to HIPAA and other protections of the privacy of health, but nonetheless, we have to look, even now, we have to have the coronavirus testing. So I suppose you could say that too, is a violation of HIPAA in some way, but there must be some way, if we look at the language there, that we get around that, with regard to, a situation like this, an emergency. Yes, Bill.
Yes.
Or Jeremy. Go ahead.
So I'm not trying to be provocative. I'm really probably showing how ignorant I am. But I wonder if there could have been a much more effective way of dealing with this if we had focused on trying to protect the vulnerable and then manage by testing the people who are likely to be okay, right? So it looks like people like me, older people, people who've had cancer, people like me probably shouldn't be walking around because, unless they want to, because they're likely to get really sick and maybe die. So we should have protected those people, and maybe not as been so, let's lock down people for a while and hope this passes and then let them out, even though we have no idea what to do once we let them out. In other words, did we approach this backwards? And some of it is transparency, but Ebola is the thing that comes to mind with me, a very deadly disease that has broken out a few times, and it hasn't gone global. And maybe it's where it broke out. Maybe it's because of transparency about it. Maybe we knew more about it. I don't know. But how would you compare and contrast how we responded to Ebola on the one hand versus COVID-19 on the other?
Yes, well, I think that that's, very interesting. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I can't discern that entirely. But I did seem to me remember, that when Ebola broke out and we sent some doctors like to Liberia, etc., there was a lot of frustration about the fact that a lot of development aid had been given, like specifically for building clinics and building schools and creating a technical knowledge basis like teachers and nurses, etc. But they were none there. And that's because of corruption. And so that's why we had to leave our Army Corps of Engineers there to create, sanitary facilities where patients could be cared for, etc. But that's different from like Fukushima, and when Japan was hit, we also sent, like many countries, aid, humanitarian aid, and they just said, don't even get off your ship, hand it to us. We have enough doctors and nurses. We just need the blankets and water and so on. So that's the difference between, working with a developed country and a developing one, especially a poor developing one, where you have all the personnel and infrastructure on the ground and you just need to give the supplies versus, you haven't got any of the infrastructure. So they were different in that way. But I also do think that because there wasn't a huge influx of Liberian people, it didn't spread too much here. And we were very careful with the few of our medical practitioners who returned to trace them. But
Right.
even then, there were quarrels, just like you're saying, that one of the medical personnel that got the Ebola, she wanted to go biking without wearing a mask or something. You see, even then, when it was just one person here or one person there recovering, there were disputes. So in that way, I think with regard to development, the issues were different, but with regard to habits and behavior, you had a lot of, discrepancy about what to do. The reason why I target in my suggestions these focal, elite focalized, say it that way, kind of, checks, like what are your lists, who attended and so on, is just to make all of what you mentioned more efficient. Because I think that when you just go after the masses of the people, I can't even imagine. All the states have been saying, we can't trace everyone. I don't know who. I walked by 1,000 people on the sidewalk today. How can I tell you who I was in contact with? It's that type of thing where it's endless. However, if you start from the top down and you have like maybe 300, high level people, and they say, I went into this building and this suite of offices, then you can immediately go to those people who service them, the secretaries, the interns, and so on. So I'm just saying it would be a more efficient way, in a way, to sort of, in this type of case, to do it top down rather than be flailing around, in stadium fulls and mega church fulls of people. You're never going to reach the end of that. So I think you're right. I mean, we need to have some of these tests, but I think we need to restructure how we do it. Because there are some people, what we're looking for is who's coming back with a high load of the virus, rather than, oh, I walked through, a stadium with one molecule of the virus in it, But the high load people are people who have been sitting together. And it's amazing too, Bill, the conference thing saying, this meeting is only for VIPs. And then it shows them in the YouTubes, they're all hugging each other. You know, these kind of big bro hugs and stuff, the two foreign ministers, etc. And you know, they have their faces, and this is December 31st. That's like a high load. So what we really want to find out is who's been sitting with a certain group of people for the past 4 days, eating at the same buffet, and like, you probably have a higher load than the average person. You see what I'm saying? And we're not intersecting the checks with that.
I think that's what's interesting to me too. If you look at the United States, at least what we know, the essential workers, the first responders, the medical people have all had a much lower incidence of infection than the general population. So, you know, I'm an amateur scientist. I mean, that says to me, what? So people who are in the front lines 24/7 have a lower incidence of disease than people who are just living their lives. Well, there's got to be something there, right? What's
Yes.
going on? What are we not understanding? What are we not doing? So,
well, yeah, I would also add to that, just from the perspective actually of epidemiology. I don't know if you're familiar, but I, in my research, was led to also look at like the regular flu. And in a normal year, 40 to 80,000 people die in our country from regular flu. And a lot of them are the same people who were carried away by coronavirus, that is the elderly and nursing homes. So
right.
This year, we have much less people dying. Like last year, the previous winter was 80,000. And nobody went into a big issue. They just figured, oh, I guess older people are just dying from the flu, you know, and so on. I don't know what people think, if they think about this data at all. But I'm just saying this year, we didn't have nearly that many cases of that death, you know, flu
right.
death, but we had so many of coronavirus. And that could be that the coronavirus was the thing that was on top of all, as they say, underlying factors. And that's why the nursing homes are hit so hard, because a lot of people there have various degrees of flu and pneumonia, and it takes them away. And then you write down into the record that it was the coronavirus, because that was the last thing that tipped them away. You see, otherwise they may have had passed away from the other factors, you see.
Yeah.
But so I agree with you, you have to know who's vulnerable to it. And especially in this case, because Ebola is 90% lethal.
Right.
But this one is 90% non-lethal.
Right.
So obviously it has to do with the underlying factors, number one, and number two, the load that you're exposed to. You see what I'm saying? So with those two things, if you factored those in, then you would create efficiency in management by going for those people for tracing and just, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. I mean, the idea of what we're doing now, to me, from a management perspective, seems insane, right? We're testing everybody, and we're letting people come in when they want, and we're testing millions and millions, and we can't process the results for more than a week. So what are we accomplishing? And nobody has, by the way, done any studies about how accurate these tests are, which to me is the next scandal that's going to come out, which is going to be that the tests that we've been using are intermittently accurate.
Well,
in both directions.
This is one of the fallacies of data. Like, the data does not indicate to us either which of, we say we did this many tests, and innocently a person will think, oh, that many American people have had the test from, you know, under the custodianship of the government or of some state or whatever community. But no one tells us how many people have had the test 10 times. You know, we don't know if all those different tests, maybe the same person went through the same intersection 25 times and was stopped. We have no idea. You know, so it's all, it's the same thing, by the way, with our divorce statistic. This many divorces, and people think, oh, that many people, but it's not the case, because some people have like serial divorces, you know, like they've had 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, you know, but I'm just saying you don't get that side of the day.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right.
I just, you know, there's so much to talk about with this. It's such a big issue. I can hardly stop.
It is. Well, I'm committed. 2 years from now, I'm going to write something about this when we know something more than we know right now. So,
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yes.
well, I'll flip it over to Jeremy, I think.
I think we have one question in the chat from Arkham. One of the maps showing BRI mentions the Old Silk Route, and it was interesting to note that the Old Silk Route started from Kashgar but did not end as per the map. However, in Pakistan, it is generally considered that at least half of the CPEC route is part of the Old Silk Route. I'm not sure how correct is that. Maybe you can enlighten on that. Thanks a lot.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't think I can fully enlighten you on that. I'm quite certain that Pakistan is you know, involved at this time with the BRI, but what it was in the ancient times, are you asking me if there was a connection there, or what? Oh, did we lose that person?
Oh, well, he's, I think they're in the chat. So, well, in the meantime.
I'm unmuted. Can I ask you?
Oh, thank you. Yes, talk.
Okay, thank you very much for a great presentation. I was just wondering, looking at the maps, that they were showing that the old Silk Route that started from Kashgar and then went from Central Asia to Europe. But in Pakistan, generally, it's considered that the CPEC, which is now being constructed under the BRI, it's at least half of it was part of the old Silk Route. So I was just wondering that how correct is that? But it was just not something related to the presentation, but just looking at the map, something just came up in my mind. Anyways,
oh, well, thank you. Yes, I will look at that some more. You know, I tried to find maps that, you know, came from what I thought were worthy sites, whether there's an explanation or whether there's a fault in the map. You know, I can look at that, and I will. But it is interesting. I do think that there is some overlay of the current BRI with the old Silk Road. There is some overlay, and obviously, you know, there's a lot of friction in the area between India and China at this time, and as well Tibet and so on. But that's like a whole other chapter of all of this. But your point is a very good one, and you know, I can definitely look at that. It's a curiosity now that you mentioned it to me as well.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Gondik, how are you?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you clarify number 3 a little bit? I think unaffordable, to me, it hints at something that's never attainable versus oh no, your third question, your paradoxical questions.
Oh, hi, Kamal. Okay.
How are you? You know, unaffordable hints at, you know, never being attainable versus you know, too expensive, as you know, you costed it out, but you know, it's not feasible on a business sense. And I think this hits to, you mentioned in your paper, pandemos, which is the commons, has to do with the commons and the public, versus modern development, which is based on a neoliberal mindset and metric. And do you think that there's any reconciliation between the two conflicting ideas? Because if we base development on the metrics that we're used to, which is cost and efficiency, how does unattainable or too expensive goal, like this pandemic has shown, to care for all, you know, how do you reconcile the two? Or
well, I don't know. And so you're asking me about unaffordability versus cost, too expensive, yes?
In regards to development.
Yes, yes, that's why Kamal, why I put both of those up and put an or between them, because I do think that they mean something different. So too expensive means truly, you know, if you sort of modify your goals or recalculate, you know, your priorities, then you can change what's in the different financial buckets around, and you can make it, you know, payable, put it that way. But unaffordable speaks more to the possibility that ethics can be viewed in so many ways, you know, to the point where you get to someone like Henry David Thoreau or John Muir, the greats of environmentalism. There is no price to put on these things at all. You know, the beauty of a mountain or your love for a person or something like that. And you get that all over the place, you know, where, you know, people are interviewed about the losses of family members, and they say there's nothing that can compensate for this. You know, it's not possible to restitute in any way in this regard or remediate. And then on the other hand, it comes down to reparations, restitutive justice, and so on, and someone has to put a price tag on it. But I think you're right. And when I put that up there, I said, I actually thought, maybe someone like Kamal will ask me about that, you know, and sure enough, I've developed a predictive quality over the years of teaching ethics. You know, you just sort of know what's going to happen next. And it does tend to make you feel hesitant to write just about anything on paper, like Machiavelli said. But anyway, thank you for that very, very good question.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
I think we're over time, but I had one question, if it's possible.
Sure.
So I think in terms of you know, what Kamal also touched on, when I was reading about the mask shortages, for example, I read that there are some U.S. producers of the masks that already earmarked to over 280 million in masks to be earmarked to go out of the United States, while our numbers were going up and we were facing a shortage here. So is it always going to be a trade-off between, you know, the market itself and you know, the needs of citizens, for example? Another case in Europe where, you know, some shipments were taken or held in some countries of the EU, even though they're supposed to be sharing those masks.
I think that's a very, very good point. And I think that would go into the category of needing, you know, the proactive management, that you need to have a better sense, not only of, you know, of how many you may need, and say at the level 1 occurrence, level 2, level 3 occurrences, etc. You know, but I also think you need to have, you know, a supply line of you know, transit, because so many places, like even in New York State, some of the areas had plenty of, they didn't have the disease so much, so they had plenty in backlog, you know, in their storerooms, but that wasn't realized until later. So I think when something like this strikes, we would need to have a better sense of, like, where are the standby supplies located, and do we have a system to transport them to the areas that are at the center of the issue, and so on. And I have really no clear knowledge of whether we've even been able to master that kind of management with regard to natural disasters, like hurricanes, especially. Like when it was Katrina, there was no one really sure of how to bring what was needed, and a few of the, you know, what are called the box stores, you know, chains were coming in with baby diapers and baby milk and things like that, because the government couldn't get there fast enough. And they were saying, you know, this has not been touched, but because of the rules of the government, we will have to throw it all away, because all of these products, you know, were exposed in some way to this disaster, but nothing is, they're not broken packages or anything. So, you know, it's a case of, are you ready to make those transitions? I think maybe we'll never get it just right. Like if you thought about, like, if we were hit by a nuclear weapon, you know, we would be like ants, you know, we would be going in thousands, just like 9/11. People don't know what to do, or, you know, the hospitals are overcome, etc. But in any case, I think we need to work on that. That's definitely what I would say. I think more could have been done with what we already had if there was a better disbursement of it, you know.
I think that's a great place to end, because I totally agree with that.
Okay, good.
A lot of this was a failure to prepare and a failure to execute, which is not to say we wouldn't have had problems anyway, but we wouldn't have had the disaster that we've had. And, you know, as you said earlier, Adela, you know, we've really had tens of thousands of deaths from the flu in previous years. It's not like we never had a flu that killed lots of people. It's not like 9/11. It's not like a nuclear attack. This happens every year. It just was worse this year. And we responded by like running around, like you said, like ants in every direction, with nobody saying, wait a minute. You know, and it continues now. New York is over it. We should have learned a lot. And it seems like we're replicating everything we did wrong in New York, other places. So it's a little disappointing.
And I would just add to that very quickly, I think the cost, for example, of the ventilators was, you know, daunting. But again, people need to apply their ingenuity to these things proactively, because I did see, for example, that actually a small team of Afghanistan women researchers had just recently developed a very low cost ventilator that you could use with didn't have to be real fancy, you know, but it worked well. And then even at the start, I mean, from Mass General, I was watching videos of young doctors saying, why are we intubating all these people? We're rupturing their lungs.
Right.
And then someone just recently said, what you need to do, can you believe it, after all this epicenter, is put the person on their stomach. Doctors have realized helps them breathe, get more oxygenated than if they're on their back. And we just put them all on their back. So, you know, there's just so much to be learned, but that just...
Agreed.
Anyway, I don't mean to go on and on, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining.
Okay. Bye-bye.